We're going to record this meeting, so I hope that's okay with everyone. Thanks, Lori, for sending that. So welcome to the webinar called Keep San Diego Businesses Thriving, and a workshop on employee ownership. I know some of you might have joined us a few years back, us being the San Diego Workforce Partnership, or a few months back, I should say, about just kind of why we're interested in employee ownership. And so today we're going to really start to dive into more and more of the specifics about how these transactions actually take place. Kind of guiding you on this journey is myself. My name is Andy Hall, the Chief Impact Officer at an organization called the San Diego Workforce Partnership. We also have some colleagues from Project Equity that I'll introduce here in a second to guide the conversation. So if you can go to the next slide, Jim. What we're going to do today is just do some introductions about the two organizations here that are hosting this event. Then we're going to talk a little bit about the mechanics of employee ownership and why in this current particular moment in particular, we think it makes sense for some business owners to really think about these transactions as a real opportunity for them and their businesses, and we'll talk all about that. We'll also hear from a company's CEO that I'll introduce in a second that has gone through the process and is going through the employee ownership transition process, and that's the company called Delta Pipeline. Then we're going to have opportunities to interact kind of on a more individual level in breakout rooms and talk about different specific models. Employee ownership has a lot of different faces, and so we'll start talking about those. Learning about financing opportunities. We'll certainly have some time for questions and answers, and an opportunity for some individual consultations about your specific business. So we're really excited to do that and spend this time together with you all today. So I introduced myself. You'll be hearing here shortly from Allison Lingain, the co-founder of a company called Project Equity, as well as her colleague Miyaka Cochran, and then also Craig Danley, CEO of Delta Pipeline, is on the line to tell his story about employee ownership. And real briefly, before I hand this off to Allison, our organization, the San Diego Workforce Partnership, serves about 10,000 job seekers per year. And we provide over about $5 million in wages and training subsidies to businesses. Why that matters, and I won't go in too much detail, but the research that we've done about employee-owned companies is that they're more likely to be stay in a region and in a given community. They're more resilient in many ways, and they more often than not present real serious wealth building opportunities for their employees. And so increasingly over the next 5 years, we want to put more and more of our $5 million in wage and training subsidies to businesses that are either in the process of or have completed an employee ownership transaction. And we're really looking to also move part of our larger $25 million or so procurement budget towards companies that are employee owned, and especially employee owned with employees here locally in San Diego. So there's kind of a dollars and cents imperative for us as we kind of look to achieve our goal of putting more of our money into programs and services that help job seekers get into employee owned companies and begin building wealth for themselves and their families. So by 2024, we'd like to kind of partner with at least 20 businesses to co-fund employee ownership feasibility studies. And we'll talk about that here in a second. And our goal as an organization is to support transactions that create 500 new employee owners over the next 3 years. And so those are kind of why we're interested in this conversation. In the San Diego Workforce Partnership, we have some money and we have some incentives and we have some staff who are out kind of looking for partners and companies that employee ownership transactions might make sense for, or in whatever form. But the actual technical expertise is not something that we have, and so that's why we partner with great organizations like Project Equity. And so with that, I'll turn it over to Allison Lingain to introduce herself and her company and walk us through some of the content in the materials in the webinar. So thank you all for joining and look forward to the conversation.
Thank you so much, Andy. Really appreciate Workforce Partnership hosting this conversation today. And I was super inspired by your comments and what you're aiming to do in terms of advancing employee ownership in San Diego and some of the reasons why. We're a national nonprofit organization. We're headquartered, if you will, based in Oakland, and we work all across California. And we're really focused on helping to make employee ownership something that is much more normal, that people know about, that they hear about, they're familiar with, given the many benefits that we're going to talk about today. And when we talk about employee ownership, we mean broad-based employee ownership. So that's compared with stock options or management buyouts, in which a small number of employees that are usually management have access to ownership. So that's what this is about today. All employees who meet basic criteria, could be a minimum number of hours or having been with the business for a certain period of time, have the opportunity to become employee owners. And it really provides value to three constituencies. So the community broadly, by retaining jobs and businesses locally, keeping companies rooted in place into the next generation and beyond. To the businesses themselves, by creating more resilient companies that outperform their peers. And of course, to the employees, by creating really high quality jobs that include building up ownership as an asset, the asset being the business where they work. And so we ultimately help business owners secure their legacies by transitioning to employee ownership. And we also help business advisors and economic development professionals spread the word and educate about employee ownership. So what kind of businesses can we work with? Well, the answer is most businesses, small, medium, large, local shops, multi-state corporations. So every shape and size. There are some very small exceptions like law practices or similar models that may fall out of the scope, and that's somewhat dependent upon state. So in California. But generally, any small business can be a good candidate for employee ownership if it meets some basic criteria of profitability. Okay, so why now? Why is this something that's particularly important in this moment in time? Well, pre-pandemic, if you guys can remember back, it feels like so long ago, pre-pandemic, we already had a small business crisis, given what's been dubbed the silver tsunami of retiring baby boomers. And COVID, of course, has taken it to a whole new level. The reality is that if more small businesses go out of business or change hands, it can really affect our local economic vitality. And we need to take action on this. This isn't something we just want to sit back and just sort of let happen however it happens, because we know that our local economies are drivers of so much. So the silver tsunami in particular, it's estimated that 1 out of every 2 small businesses with employees across the country are owned by the baby boomer generation. In California, across the whole state, this translates to nearly 300,000 companies employing nearly 3 million Californians. So the impact, if these companies don't find buyers, or if they're bought up by increasingly larger firms, wealth consolidation, sort of control of our economy consolidation, will be absolutely huge. So we want to make sure that we are helping our beloved locally owned businesses find succession options. And we want to make sure that employee ownership is one that gets looked at alongside of the rest. I want to share a story from one of our clients that I think really brings to life the benefits of employee ownership. So this is Chuck Holding. He's an employee at Cal Solar. They're based in Grass Valley, California. They're solar design and installation company with about 40 employees. So we helped Cal Solar transition to becoming 100% employee owned in 2019, just before the pandemic. And when COVID hit, what they did is they immediately put all of their workers on furlough so they could tap unemployment. Now, at a typical company, this would work would totally pause, right? Your workers are on furlough, they're receiving unemployment. But at this business, the employee owners continued to work and innovate because they knew that the future of the company was their own. They developed a brand new product line that helped them generate almost a year's worth of revenue in a period of months. And as a result, they not only met their 2020 projections, they were able to rehire their team, they hired new and additional staff, and they increased their wages by over 20% since becoming employee owned. So would furloughed employees in a non-employee owned business have shown this proactive ingenuity? Probably not, right? It's all because of that employee engagement that true ownership brings. So as a business owner, for those of you who are business owners and are thinking about what your succession plan is, you probably know that selling a business isn't easy, no matter what path you take. The reality is that about 20% of businesses are put up for sale, end up selling, and that kids aren't taking over their parents' companies anymore. Only about 15% transition within families. So a lot of companies end up, being at risk of closing simply because of this succession challenge. And then when you look at the range of available succession options, they really should be considered through the lens of what your own priorities are. We often suggest to business owners that they do sort of a thought experiment. Imagine you've sold your company and you're sitting 5 years after that sale, and you're looking back at the business. What is it that you really want to see? What is it that's going to just leave you settled and happy and confident that you made the right decision? So, as I noted on the previous slide, even though selling to family owners can be a great option, if you do have that option, terrific. But realistically, only about 15% of companies pass on to the second generation. An acquisition can be a way to sell the business, but may or may not deliver on the values that matter most to you. Often employees are laid off. The company, as you know it, as you have invested decades, 20, 30, 40, sometimes longer number of years into, disappears. And so closing down is, of course, the last resort that we want to avoid altogether. And that tends to happen when there's no plan in place at all, and then something tragic happens, a health crisis or otherwise. So what we are hoping that we can engage you in today is that employee ownership, it can be a really great option. It can deliver a market value sale, preserve your legacy, retain employees, and may also come with significant and very meaningful tax advantages. So with that, I will pass it over to Miyaka, who's going to delve into more of the details of what this all looks like.
Thank you very much, Allison. So let's get into what is employee ownership specifically. So one of the most common forms of employee ownership is through stock options or otherwise stock distribution, and often are only available to management, key employees, or employees who've been there for a long time. But in contrast, broad-based employee ownership is a path that gives all employees the opportunity who meet the basic criteria to become employee owners. So they have the option to, and then there's a path towards. And let's get into a little bit about the unique benefits of employee ownership. So when we talk about employee ownership and when people see employee ownership as an option, a lot of the emphasis and focus, understandably, is the benefits to the employees. Those are often more widely known than the other unique benefits. One of the key things that we see is the fact that owners can achieve a fair sales price. It's sometimes believed that selling to your employees, you have to take a large hit on what you can sell the business for, but it doesn't have to be a charitable or fully altruistic option. It can actually be an excellent option to provide a great sales price for the owner as well. In addition to that, the owner really remains in the driver's seat in terms of influencing that pacing and timeline of their exit and the transition. Some owners choosing to use this as a way to phase out over time, share the burden of ownership, so that they can get a little bit more work-life balance while still remaining in the company and being able to ease out over time. And lastly, one of the most amazing parts of employee ownership is how it preserves that company's legacy, the culture, the people, and the other assets that make that business strong. With employee ownership by the employees themselves being able to become owners in this business, there's more incentive, both financially and culturally, to be able to stick with the business. And so it really promotes longevity of the business and hangs on to those employees that make the business great. When we look in terms of employee ownership and how it compares against your standard business ownership models, you can actually see that employee ownership companies generally have about 8.5% higher profit margins than their peers. And a lot of this reason is because of tax advantages and other financial benefits, but also the fact that you really are turning everyone into an owner. You're unlocking that ownership mindset. And from the bottom to the top, you have more eyes on the overall company and more engagement and focus. In addition to that, what you see is a growth in sales and employment. So more profit margins, more engagement in that company are translating to rising sales, which then creates more job opportunities in the region, which is why it's a really impactful tool in workforce development in different regions. Now, in terms of the other ways that we can compare it, let's take a more recent example and look at how these employee-owned firms performed during the pandemic. When we're looking at the job retention rate, it was 4-to-1 against traditionally owned businesses. And there are a few reasons for this. And I think one of the great stories, as Allison highlighted, was Cal Solar, where you have a group of employee owners who, in the midst of a pandemic, who are furloughed, were motivated to come up with an idea that really turned the business around and were able to reach their even original or close to sales goal for the year. This is the many of ways that they can kind of unlock this, and the data really shows how how much sturdier these businesses are during times of crisis. And this also translates into, again, fewer layoffs. So when you look at the data year over year, even going back years prior to the pandemic, from 2002 to 2014, you can see that the layoff percentage is a lot lower with employee-owned companies. In addition to that, as we go back to the more well-known parts of employee ownership, is it translates into better wages. And so you can see that there are several studies that highlight this in terms of how they perform in terms of wages and compensation against traditional non-employee owned companies. And this can be in the form of profit sharing, but also the fact that the company, if it's growing, having sales growth, having profit growth, that also can translate into other forms of compensation, such as just an hourly wage increase as well. Now, if this all sounds great, which I think it does, I think it's time to open up the hood a little bit and look at the mechanics of how employee ownership actually works. So let's take a look at how the business is sold. From a very basic standpoint, employee ownership transitions largely are done in this way. A sale price and deal terms are finalized. The transitioned employee-owned business obtains a loan. So a new entity is created, and that entity takes out a loan, which is paid off out of future revenue to purchase the old business. So it retains the same name if you would like. Sometimes it makes sense to change the name, such as we have an example of somebody who had their name on the business. It was Rockman, a consulting firm, and they changed it to Rockman et al. As a part of the transition to really embody the fact that they were becoming a cooperative. Now, in terms of the financing of the sale, where does the money come from? So the business owner generally will participate in the financing to the tune of, on average, around 30 to 50% in the form of a seller's note. The rest, we work with community development funds, a CDFI, or a bank that participate in about 50 to 70%, and the employees generally have a nominal buy-in. This can be a couple hundred or a couple $1,000s, depending on the needs of the business and what they feel is going to be best, and that can even be taken out of future paychecks. The business owner now taking that seller's note, one of the reasons that they do that is because they say, okay, I would like 60% now. And at the time of the sale, that's financed by the CDFI or bank, but I'm okay with taking 40% over time, including interest. And so that's a way that some business owners are able to work the strategy of these types of deals from a financial standpoint, so that when they're looking about 5 to 8 years down the line, after everything is paid off, they're actually netting more than they would have from 100% payment up front. Now, getting further into the advantages, we see, first of all, that the market price is good. So you have a fair sales price, and we establish this through a debt capacity analysis. So we do financial projections in the future and really look at what that business is able to bear. It delivers significant tax advantages. Both the owner and business can potentially benefit, and the owner is able to really control that process, be in that driver's seat in terms of driving the sale, the timing, the process, which really is a lot of allows a lot of flexibility based on the owner's needs and desires. And then in terms of the financing, there's a lot of flexibility as well. Because it's a leveraged buyout, because that new entity is actually taking out the loan that's paying for future revenue, there's lots of really fun ways for the owner to be able to take advantage of that, especially if they are wanting to, have a little bit less upfront, extract more over time. There's a lot of tools that you can implement this, which are more difficult to do in a traditional M&A acquisition with a private buyer, because they don't necessarily want the previous owner to be benefiting in other ways from future revenue. They would prefer to just buy it outright in most cases. And then last, and my personal favorite, is the way it strengthens local economies. You can really see the effect of this in terms of new employee owners who are building wealth and equity in their lives. And since they are all owners, that money that they are making from this business is going right back into the community where they live and really bolsters that local economy. And to open up a little bit for us in terms of how we actually work. So we've kind of looked at the benefits, we've looked at a little bit of the mechanics of the sale. Let's talk about our process. We start through exploration, and this is in the form of consultation calls. So I myself am a business engagement manager here at Project Equity. So what I do is I talk with business owners and businesses and really help them explore and understand the different models of employee ownership and help estimate the viability of this. So I help you explore the fit and can it fit your needs and goals both for yourself and the business moving forward, because ultimately what we're here to do is make sure that this is more of an option on the menu that people can check off. If it doesn't work, that's fine. You've gotten a valuable exercise and learned about succession planning. But if it's viable and it's interest, we can move on into our feasibility phase. So step 2 is our feasibility. And this is where we actually do a deep dive on the financials. We do financial projections. We do a debt capacity analysis. There's a really holistic view from the financial analysis for the business to establish what it's worth through a range of recommended sales prices based on different financing scenarios. So that's a way that you as the owner can really see your menu of options for what you could get now and or later as a part of a transition. In addition to that, we outline your needs for a management or ownership transition, and then we engage the employees. Now, third is the transition. So let's say you get to the feasibility and you're saying, this sounds great. We'd love to move forward and make this transition happen. You have a core team of a few employees, a handful of employees that you've selected to really kind of be that buying side, represent the new employee-owned company. And we design it with you. So we go out and we help develop the financing. We have some funds that we've actually developed, and there are a lot of community financing partners that we have, so we can really help you secure that financing to make the transition happen. And then we design it by building it from the ground up, continuing with employee engagement and training. And then we finalize the sale. We bring in the lawyer and the CPA to get all the legal documents in place and make sure all the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed. And then once we sign, the business owner gets paid for the portion that is financed. And then we actually, Project Equity, one of the things that makes our program very unique is that we stick around with the company through what we call our Thrive program. So we'll stick with that new business, that new employee-owned entity for up to 2 years for continued support and guidance from everything from new employee owner onboarding to board development and healthy governance. We'll be there to help provide consultation, advising, and making sure that the company is continuing to thrive in its new future. And with that, I would like to hand it off to my colleague, Jim Caponegro, who's going to take us through a conversation with Craig from Delta Pipeline.
Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Miyaka. I want to introduce you today to Craig Danley of Delta Pipeline. And Craig's got a great story, and he's got the experience that for you who are listening today, if you just heard Miyaka and these great opportunities, is this something I want to look into? Craig's not only looked into it, but he's lived it. So I'm going to introduce Craig Danley, and I'm going to interview him a little bit so we can learn a little bit more about what Craig does and how he's gone through the opportunity to take his business from sole ownership all the way to employee ownership. Hello, Craig.
Hey, Jim. Thanks for having me. What a great presentation. I wish I would have saw that about 20 years ago. I don't know what I'll be able to add, except though I've been through it. I mean, that really what you guys laid out, all the benefits and why we should choose employee ownership is awesome points, right? So I wrote some of them down so I can go remind my people.
That's great.
So we're an underground pipeline company. So we're a construction company. We do the fire hydrants you see and the catch basins where all the rainwater goes. Well, in California, sometimes we get a little rain. We have 65, we vacillate between 60 and 70, 75 people. And we've been in business for 30 years. We have been a employee-owned company for, this is our 5th year.
So Craig, tell us a little bit about why you decided to transition your business to employee ownership.
Again, the points that Allison had made up front are a lot of the reasons, but we were already kind of a culture of an employee ownership. We were already sharing profits with our people. We give 10% of gross margins back to our employees who now are shareholders. They need to wait a year now today to be a shareholder, but the reason that we really were compelled to do that was really to put our money where our mouth was. We were sharing profits, but letting go of control and sharing control is a whole different story, and trying to get the buy-in more than just around money, but really building an organization takes a different type of passion. But I think to the point that was in the presentation is, I'm a very young baby boomer. I don't even think I fit the silver wave. I'm younger than 65, but there's only so many years left, and what was going to happen with the business. I have 3 brothers in the business. So it's kind of a business family, but I agree. The market value that we would have gotten through the family and trying to help them with financing and it just seemed like too much drama to go that route. And besides, they're not the only ones that helped build the business. The employees helped us build the business over the last 25 years, and now 5 more years for the 30. So it seemed challenging, which I'm always up for a challenge. And it's really what I believe, right? It's how do we get people to engage in be an owner of their own life? And so what I've learned is to own a company and not necessarily get people to be an entrepreneur, but to be an owner and to experience not only the ups of employee ownership, but the downs. I mean, the risk and the rewards. And I really believe that's something that's missing today in our country. Actually, I think we think that it's going to be different than that. And I love the silver wave. We need to ride the wave. We need to be able to experience all of that and be responsible for our lives and be responsible for our actions. So employee ownership was a perfect fit for us.
How did employee ownership change the way you do business or change your business overall?
Based on what I said, you wouldn't think that it changed, right? That we were already that culture. But the truth is, when everybody becomes a shareholder and you're now a shareholder, I'm the former CEO. My title is shareholder. I'm a lead shareholder. So you're doing it all for a different reason. And the training and the planning and the desire and the passion to help other people benefit and understand and learn what it takes to build an organization, be part of an organization, and to be scared to death at the same time as hopeful, excited, and faith that you're going to pull it off. I don't think there's anything like it. I wouldn't change what I've done in my experience for anything.
Is it possible for you to share a story of one of your employee owners and how the new company structure has benefited them?
Yeah, well, instantly you have to, we created a board. And so in that process, we start putting a couple people on there that are on my leadership team. So there's an executive leadership team, there's a board with different committees. And so we're following all of those processes. But even when you look out at the foreman, Travis Gallegos is a gentleman who, since he's joined our company, he bought a home, he raised a family, now he has 2 children. He just sold his home, now he's bought his second home. He's engaged in the 401k, he's on the ESOP committee. He is a pro employee ownership. I mean, he believes in what we're doing. He's fully committed. When he first started, he could do everything. He was already a foreman, but really we hired him, to start out as a helper, then a pipe layer, and he had to go through each step of the way to accept those responsibilities and prove that he was a leader. And today I would say the way that he's a voice for the ESOP, for employee ownership, ESOP being it's the same thing, employee ownership. He's committed. He's loyal. He hasn't jumped ship for $2 an hour. He hasn't jumped ship for, $3 more over here, because he has longevity. He believes in where the company is going to be. He believes that he has a opportunity to potentially even be the lead shareholder someday, because the focus and the vision of the company is to touch as many lives as we can touch. So if we start at 20, can we get to 30? If we're at 60, can we get to 100? And we also believe that the processes and the systems, that the employee ownership and how the buy-in is from the people, the more people that you actually have that are operating within those systems and processes, all the weight doesn't land on the original 3 or the original 5. It begins to be spread out. So the responsibility and the risk begin to be adapted and adopted by the people, by the shareholders. If anyone has a trick to do it faster, I would love to hear from you. But it is not a sprint; it's a marathon, and it's something I believe in. And I believe that it's required for our state, for our cities, for our country. If 50% of the companies that were in business right now were employee ownership, it would change how our world operates.
So Craig, you've been in employee ownership company for 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
What would you like to know then that you know now? Like, what would you want to have known at the beginning of the process that you now know 5 years in advance, and you could give advice to the people who are listening today?
The stronger it's in the presentation, the stronger that the 3 or the 5 or the 10 or however many it is that you're really thinking of transitioning over to. I would be having conversations with them up front. I would be, honest conversations of your intentions and what your hope is and how you believe in them and how you trust them and how you depend on them and what your focus and what your strategy is to move forward and to see if they're even interested, because everybody says that they want to be an owner and everybody says that they want responsibility and they want to be, a C-suite player. But as an owner, if all of you that are owners on the call, it's not always, it's not always a pretty picture to be the owner. It's not always fun. And so, to have that honest dialogue, I actually had a couple of people actually did the transaction because I didn't do that. I actually had a couple of people leave. I thought, and they were people that I were choosing to be on that team, but they knew the intensity of how it is for me to be an owner, and they knew that I was going to pass some of that intensity and that responsibility on. So it's okay, but those are things that I wish that I would have known and I would have done. And the other thing is I wish I had heard this presentation a long time ago, not for me, but for them. I have some guys that have been with the company for 30 years and they're not going to benefit because we've only been an employee owner for 5 years now. So for Alfredo and Jorge and, these guys, they're not going to benefit as much as some of the new young people like Travis and people who are being hired today. So those are some of the things I wish I would have known. And I wish I would have believed them that it's a marathon and not a sprint.
So Craig, we just have one more minute left in this section. Is there anything else any kind of advice you'd like to give to people today?
I really believe in this vehicle. I'm honored to partner with Project Equity. They didn't necessarily do my deal, but part of the deal is super important, and somebody that you have to support you through kind of the vetting process, right? So if you're interested today, I would take advantage of not only a phone call, but even, a meeting, because there is a vetting process that helps you really think about what you might need to do to get ready for this. Maybe you're ready today, but there is a vetting process. And I believe that what I've experienced from these guys so far is the support through that process. There's a ton of questions, even after you've done the deal. It's a very intricate, we become a tax pension. It's a complex deal. Not everybody, I surely couldn't do it on my own. I'm still learning. So I've learned some things today just by watching your presentation. So it's a privilege to be part, and being able to speak to any potential employee owners. But I highly recommend this as a transaction and a viable, fair exchange, and not only for ourselves as owners and everything that we did to get our money and our sweat equity back out, but I actually believe this can change the world.
Well, thanks, Craig, for sharing your story with us today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for having
Miyaka,
me.
back to you, my friend.
Thank you very much. Excellent to hear Craig's story and insights from someone who's gone through the process. So let's change it up a little bit and do something a little fun here with the Project Equity Challenge. And so we've talked a lot about employee ownership, and we'd like to see how much you've picked up and maybe how much you knew before. So let's start with a little quiz. Question number 1. True or false? Selling to employees requires accepting a lower sales price. Is it true? Is it false? It's false. Fair sale price established by debt capacity. So even though it's commonly thought that selling to your employees requires you to take a lower selling price, that's actually false. And thank you, Margaret, for saying your vote in the chat. For anybody who likes to want to play along, go ahead and follow along and put your vote in the chat. So let's go to quiz question number 2. True or false? Employees are going to have to foot the bill. The employees themselves are going to have to pay for the transaction. True or false? Any thoughts? That's actually false. Employees are not obligated to finance the transaction. Usually it is completed through a leveraged buyout, and under certain models, the employees have a small buy-in amount. Now, quiz question 3, true or false? Owners can remain involved in strategic direction after they sell. Can they sell the company and remain involved in key roles or strategic direction? And that is absolutely true. Selling owners have many options to stay involved in the business, whether it's their current role, a new role, or even more of an advisory position through consultation or a seat on the board of directors. And last but certainly not least, we have question number 4, true or false? All employees will be managing the business equally. selling to the employees, so all employees will be managing the business equally. Is that true or false? That is false. One of the most common misconceptions actually about employee ownership is that everyone's going to have to vote on everything. What color do we want the cups in the break room? Is it purple? Is it blue? Is it polka dot? That's not true. Management should be in place to ensure a robust operational structure, but there are many ways for employees to have influence over the operations of the company, through voting for board seats for a board of directors, or having and establishing an employee advisory board as well. A lot of fun tools in the toolkit once you transition. Now, let's go and transition to employee ownership models. So let's do a little bit of a breakdown of the most common models of broad-based employee ownership. So the first one is what Delta Pipeline is, which is an ESOP. This is an employee stock ownership plan. It's a qualified retirement plan that itself owns all or part of the company on behalf of the employees. Another form are worker-owned cooperatives. They are wholly owned by the employee owners who share in profits and also are able to elect or potentially even serve on a board of directors. And then the third, less common one, but more common in Europe, is the employee ownership trust. It's a highly customizable form of employee ownership that can be adapted to incorporate democratic principles, profit sharing, and others. And so you can make it look more like an ESOP or a co-op or something in between. Now, if we go further and look at the ESOP, we recommend ESOPs have at least about 40 plus employees. There's amazing tax relief for the company. It's tax positive for the selling owner. But there are also higher setup and ongoing costs. It's free to the employees, and there are potentially options to be designed for employees to have governance roles similarly to a co-op. But as Craig said as well, it's something to consider because this, as being a stock ownership plan that's in the form of a retirement plan that works functionally like a 401k, in some scenarios, you can look at the length of the time that you are with the new ESOP, the benefit grows. And so that's something to consider if you have employees who've already been with you for 30 years and the like. There are great options for them as well, but this is something to consider. So moving on to worker-owned cooperatives, you have 10 plus employees here, make a good size for a starting worker-owned cooperative. There's democratic governance in the form of a board of directors that's elected by the worker owners. It's very equitable in terms of the profit sharing. It's much less expensive to set up than an ESOP. There are some tax positive benefits for it. There's a nice equity stake for the employees, and it's universal. It's 100% employee owned and very popular because of the low cost to set up, and there's a wide range and full range of democratic values for the employee base. Now, for the final one, employee ownership trust, it's a highly flexible model. Again, we recommend similarly as a co-op, about 10 plus employees is a good side to consider it. The employees are the beneficiary, so the trust actually holds the company on behalf of the employees, and in most cases, the company cannot be sold in the future. What you're trading off for flexibility here, the fact that it's free to the employees, there's built-in profit sharing, is the fact that there are a few, if any, tax advantages right now. So the employee ownership trust was first established in the UK and can be seen as a great way to protect the business to ensure it continues to operate for the benefit of the employees now and in the future. But you're trading off that customization for the tax advantages that co-ops and ESOPs have. Now, if you want to learn more, because this is certainly a lot of information, I invite you to schedule a consult with me. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to drop my little scheduling link right in the chat here. You can click that link to schedule a free consultation with me. So whether you are just curious or maybe you want to learn more information, we can have a casual chat. And for those of you who are maybe more seriously considering this, we can actually go a little bit deeper and talk about readiness factors and viability. I can help you assess these options, give you honest feedback about the benefits and potential challenges that you could face when doing a transition to employee ownership, as well as what model may fit your needs and goals and be best for the business in the future. So I look forward to talking with you. I've actually saved time this afternoon specifically to be available to those on this webinar. And so if you want to talk this afternoon or some date in the future, use that link to book it. It's first come, first serve, but I look forward to speaking with you more about this. And yeah, so please book a time. All right, so now we're going to split up into rooms. So I will hand it back as we kind of talk about how the breakout rooms are going to happen. And I believe...
Lori, can you help us with the breakout rooms?
Yes, do you want people to go now?
Yes, please.
Okay, and just to let everyone know, sorry, my camera is not working for some reason all of a sudden, but we did break it up by company size. But if you're interested in, let's say we put you in a cooperative, but you're actually interested in an ESOP, you can just send me a chat and I'll switch you into the other room. But we did pre-assign, so just send me a message if we happen to send you into the wrong room, but I'll send you off now.
Thank you very much.
Hey, Lori.
Yes.
Can you put me in number 1?
Yes.
I need to join with Miyaka. Thank you.
No problem.
All right, that's great. So we actually have somebody raising their hand. I'm going to ask you to unmute if you would like to speak and ask your question.
Hello, yes. I was just wondering for this type of structure, like for what kind of business, say the size or the revenue of the business, like does not matter, like it's okay for all type of businesses. Say for example, I have like a small hair salon with like 10 stylists. So would this type of employee ownership structure applicable to this type of business?
Yes, that's a great question. The good thing about these models is that they do really work across all industries, but there are certain financial benchmarks that you want to look at in terms of estimating how viable it is. So generally what we recommend is when you're looking back at the past 5 years of revenue, do you have 3 years of profitability? And is there enough profitability in the business to ensure that the company has some longevity? And also, is that going to be impactful for the employees? So if the business is profitable, but that profit is only $100 a year and you have 10 employees, that's not necessarily going to be impactful. And maybe there are ways that you can work on that profitability to be ready to transition to employee ownership. But it works with all different models. And I've actually consulted with some hair salons specifically on this, one of whom is actually going down this path, not with us specifically, but they are going down the path of transitioning to employee ownership. And so it can be really great for industries in which you have a specific training or skill, such as hairstylists and barbers, which really ultimately in your area, there's kind of a cap in which you can make. And so their only option is to either open their own hair salon or get into a management role, but that's not necessarily what they want to do. And so employee ownership can be a great way for them to advance financially and build more wealth and capital without having to do something else like be a sole owner, open a new ownership. They can really build on the success of the business. And so I think in that particular instance, it's actually an excellent industry fit.
All right, thank you.
Very welcome. Okay, do we have more questions, thoughts, anything else we'd like to get into? I see a couple more people are showing interest in the in my free consultations. I'm very excited. It's one of my favorite things to do is be able to talk to owners about their business and understand their goals, their challenges, and their pains, and see what we can work out to help support their future. You know, I will say that before coming to Project Equity, I spent 8 years in the tech startup space. One of the reasons why I was attracted to this work is because I was at the center of a lot of different acquisitions. And I saw acquisitions that went very well, and I saw acquisitions that went also very poorly, and owners who really felt a lot of regret about the decision to sell to a larger entity, you know, or layoffs that happened and everything like that. And so, you know, it really made me passionate about being able to want to help support particularly independent businesses and make sure that, you know, the legacy that business owners are, you know, have created is able to continue and those jobs are preserved in the future. And when that owner exits, they can feel really good about the decisions that they've made and, you know, who they've passed that torch along to. All right, so Allison or Jim, do you have any other questions that you'd like to ask me about some of the work that I do more in the ground level with owners, or maybe from our partners, Lori or Andy, if you have any questions that we can answer, would love to be able to get to those too.
Yeah, you know, Craig mentioned a little bit about the struggles at the very beginning of, you know, when he shares the information with his employees versus just jumping into the process as a sole owner. What kind of things do you hear? What kind of learnings have you heard along the way?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say it largely depends on your culture and relationship you have with your employees. You know, with some owners, it makes sense to really kind of, you know, front load those conversations. Basically, you know, for some owners, it makes sense to talk to their employees before they do anything. Others, they really want to go through the financial exercise of doing a feasibility study to make sure that the company is going to be financially viable for the transition, to not get their employees' hopes up. And so we really see it across the spectrum, but that's one of the things that we can help make recommendations on in our consultation calls, because we have, we have to kind of meet you where you are with your specific needs, your specific dynamic and relationship with your employees, and what's going to be best. And there's not a one size fits all approach to this. That's why we really take a thorough approach in our seeking to understand the context and specifics of your business, so we can make recommendations based on that. But we have ways and strategies to approach employees, early, even in the consultation phase, and then also, after the feasibility, after we've done the financial exercises, so that the owner really can speak with a place of confidence that this is very likely to work before they speak to the employees. So, yeah, and then one last point I will say about that, and then we'll pass it back. I'll pass it back to Andy to close us out. Is that, I think that you kind of get two different reactions on the end of the spectrum of extremes, right? You have employees who say, yeah, this is great. I want to be an employee owner. I'm going to make all this money, and I want to be a CEO too, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's important to have education, training, and understanding of what an employee owner means. And then also, if they have desires to be on the board or be in a leadership position, to really understand what that means holistically. And it's one of the reasons we also stick around for up to 2 years as a part of our Thrive program, because we can provide some of that employee engagement to help people really understand what it truly means to be an employee owner. On the other end of the spectrum, you have employees who, when you first bring up employee ownership, they're like, look, I just want to clock in and clock out and get my paycheck. I don't really care about anything else. And that's not necessarily a blocker either. I think through some basic understanding of what it means, you can see employees who have that perspective, both see the value of what they're going to be able to get with sometimes minimal extra effort on their part. And as they kind of start to feel that benefit of the profit sharing, it can be very transformative for those types of employees who maybe are thinking that they just want to clock in and clock out, but they get really kind of absorbed into that ownership culture and mindset that really comes from these types of structures. So it's, I think that if just regardless of where people are on the spectrum, I think a little bit of information, education, and understanding can go a long way in engaging your employees. And I think that that's a great spot to go ahead and wrap us up. Thank you for those who've reached out and already booked a time with me. I look forward to talking with you. With that, I will pass it back to Andy Hall to close us out.
Thanks, Miyaka, and thanks everybody for joining us today. And we just really appreciate you here. The people who are here are always the right people. So we have this message recorded, and we will be sharing with all of you, as well as other people who have registered, and all the materials. So thanks, and have a good Thursday afternoon.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.